Hello everybody, Rockley Smile here, and I have something a bit different for you, a tier list. I've been playing a lot of classic FPS games recently, and I thought maybe we could go on a little trip down memory lane with some of the either starting weapons, the tier 1 or the tier 2 shotguns in this case. And props to you if you can call out what all of these games' shotguns are just by looking at the images across the bottom. I'll go over them, of course, but it's sort of it runs the gamut in some of the early to mid 90s ones through some of the early 2000s ones, and there's not really a lot of rhyme or reason other than just these are ones that I have a lot of time spent with and have personal opinions about. So I'm sure there's ones that you might want on or off the list. Feel free to let me know what those might be, or if you have opinions about the ones that are included. But there's a lot of staples here, as you can see. So starting on the left, we've got the Doom 1 classic shotgun. It's the first weapon you find after the original starting pistol. After that, we've got the Doom 64 shotgun. And of course, these are the original single-barreled shotguns, not the upgraded super shotguns. That might be another video, wink, wink. Then we've got the Quake 1 starting weapon, actually, and you are given a melee in this one as well, although, well, you are given a melee in most of these. And that is a consideration. A lot of these shotguns' versatility varies depending on the game, based on what you're given, whether you have access to a full loadout of weapons or not. In some games, you can only carry a couple. In some games, you have access to the whole roster of weapons as you go. So their utility varies also depending on indoor, outdoor, what kind of enemies you're fighting in that. Then we've got the Quake 2 starting weapon, the original shotgun there. Then we've got the Half-Life 1 shotgun, the Duke Nukem 3D shotgun, the Marathon 2 Durandal and Infinity dual shotguns. I think you can get them either one or two, depending on, if you found a second one or not. They're displayed as akimbo in this particular configuration. Then we've got the Fear shotgun. Following that, we've got the GoldenEye 007 shotgun. Then we've got the Halo Combat Evolved shotgun. This one you may not remember off the top of your head, because, to be honest, I didn't either. This is the Perfect Dark shotgun. Then we've got the Serious Sam 1 shotgun, Shadow Warrior shotgun, and finally the Turok 1 shotgun. So, I'm sure you've probably got opinions already. Our tier list is as follows. Top tier, meaning these are some of the best you could find. I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of weapons that are going to fall into this category. Particularly, these are not generally super commonly used weapons in general, but I'm going to use the same tier list probably for other weapons too, and I kind of configured it to be, well, as you can see, I use the World of Warcraft white, green, blue, purple, common to rare configuration on that. So we're going to start off on the left and just work our way over. The original Doom 1 shotgun. It's reasonably versatile. You're going to get it pretty often. This is honestly an interesting question for me. How many of you just load your save when you die versus let the game kill you and then restart you with no arsenal? I think most people are going to load their save, right? So how often do you find yourself starting from scratch again? That kind of depends. That might change your outlook on how useful this weapon is. If you're playing Doom 1, well, you don't have a super shotgun to upgrade to, so this might be all you get for the shotgun category, and in that case, I'm going to call it either a staple or a fallback option. And I guess I should probably qualify, because it does actually really change your opinion here. I personally have played Doom 2 the most over, the series. So I've usually not had a lot of reasons to stick with this weapon. If I was playing Doom 2, I would say this is a fallback option. If I was playing Doom 1, which have less HP tanky kind of enemies, in that case, I would call it a staple. So I'm going to say, since we're dealing with the original iterations of most of these weapons, the lowest form of them, whatever that happens to take, in that case, I'm going to call it a staple. So this is the Doom 1 shotgun in this particular case. There's no other upgrade to go to. So moving on. Doom 64. This one, you will always have a super shotgun to upgrade to, and in fact, you'll be able to get it very quickly most of the time. The impact to this one doesn't feel particularly punchy. It's not a particularly beefy-looking weapon. The audio to it doesn't feel great. It's fine. I wouldn't say it's forgettable, but I don't think I would call it a staple either. In fact, the only times you ever really want to use this one are, well, when you're trying to use less ammo, in my particular opinion, and maybe your opinion differs here as well. Most of the time when I want to hit something, I want to hit it hard, and I usually have a super shotgun, so fallback option at best. Yeah, it's really not doing enough damage to warrant using it all the time, and you're usually going to have a better option. Quake 1, starting shotgun. Now this one does not feel particularly punchy to me. It does not get a lot done, and it's a similar situation with this one where you're usually in interior corridors, and ammo consumption's not a huge problem in this game in particular as far as I remember it. I would say the Quake 1 shotgun is probably at best a fallback option, perhaps forgettable. The super shotgun in Quake 1 just feels infinitely better to use, and I just prefer to use it. I just want to experience that sweet serotonin of the boom chick, as you might remember. I'm gonna say this one is it's tough to say between forgettable and fallback. I can't recall ever wanting to just use this weapon. I'm gonna call it forgettable. That might be controversial. Maybe you think it's higher than that. Now, less controversial, I think, the Quake 2 shotgun. You'll pardon the image got a bit cropped there. I opted for the square configuration on these. You know what it looks like, most likely, if you played Quake 2 at all. I think this is, perhaps out of this entire list, with maybe one other exception, the definition of forgettable. This is probably one of my least favorite shotguns out of this whole thing. It doesn't feel great to use. The animation feels a bit jank. I seem to remember back when I played Quake 2, I had the Mac version. I used to be a Mac gamer, if you can believe it, in my very, very young years, starting out with classic FPS games. And there was this tessellation kind of thing where the poly mesh would kind of bounce around. It looked really goofy. And I don't know that that was in all versions of Quake 2, but it kind of stuck in my head as this sort of janky thing with Quake. So I guess I had sort of a bad opinion of Quake 2 because of that. It's probably not the game's fault. I don't know. So I'm going to say this is forgettable. I don't really look forward to using that gun, and I'd much prefer the super shotgun if I ever have the option. I usually do. Moving on to the Half-Life 1 shotgun. Now, this is a beefy boy. Every time that I think of using this shotgun, I automatically get that Boom Chick Quake 1 kind of vibe to it. It feels real good to shoot. It eliminates enemies very easily. If you have ammo for it, it seems like a staple at least. And I think this is one of the ones that may even be a contender for top tier. And I'm looking at the list now. There's maybe 2 or 3 out of this whole thing that I think are close to that. I'm going to say easily staple. And, I'm actually going to go ahead and put it in top tier. I think this might be one of the best. It's versatile in that its range, as far as I can remember, is not especially short. I mean, all of these are shotguns. They're all meant for close range, but in some of them, the spread pattern spreads much sooner than in other cases. And this one, I believe it's also got an alt fire that shoots both barrels at once, which is just like the meatiest, chunkiest blam that you could feel. So it feels good to use. It has a good sound effect. It does a lot of damage. You're usually filled with ammo for it. I mean, what else could you really ask for out of a shotgun? Yeah, it's a good one. Next, we've got Duke Nukem 3D. I believe this is your starting weapon, if I recall correctly. And I think it's just easily a staple. Out of all of the weapons in Duke, and Duke does have a pretty varied arsenal to it, this is one that I think I go back to quite a bit. You can also recall, you can pair it up with a melee attack, and in this case, it's Duke's big ol' boot, which can kind of pair in for extra damage, and most of the Duke 3D areas that you're going to be in they tend to be interior a lot of the time. So a close-range weapon plus a melee kick, that seems like a good combo. There's no worries about splash damage with rockets or any kind of crazy, plasma stuff. It's pretty simple. I think it's a good, useful, versatile weapon that does a good amount of damage, and you're usually going to have it ready to go. So I'm going to call that a staple. Now, the marathon weapons, and this might be one that's a little bit more exotic to some of you guys that maybe didn't play this one much growing up. As I said, I was a Mac person in my formative FPS years, and Marathon got a lot of play for me, specifically Durandal. I got really into map editing and messing around with Anvil and Forge, making my own, custom physics models and messing around with all the combinations of stuff in there. So I got a lot of time spent with these weapons, and surprisingly, these are more near and dear to me than a lot of these games, funny enough. And I seem to recall my usage of this weapon. It was a lot. I use this weapon all the time. It was generally pretty easy to find one of them, and I'm pretty sure I usually had two. It had a very satisfying flippy effect whenever you shot it and reloaded, because it was a single fire, and then you would flip it over, and then the next round would be ready to go. And you could alternate. If you play Overwatch, you might compare this to Reaper's shotguns. In fact, just no throwing them away at the end of the day. You just always keep reloading. They're very versatile. I don't think you had a ton of ammo for them, to be honest. I think you would go through them fairly quickly, but they did a ton of damage, and they were kind of a mainstay. So they were quick to fire. There's an argument to be made that they might be top tier, but I think in this case, you didn't have enough usage out of them to be constantly just using them as like your main weapon or anything. I think you'd prefer the assault rifle or something like that, which also had a grenade option. So I'm going to call that a staple as well. Yeah, fond memories of the Marathon arsenal, and they only ever added an additional single weapon with Infinity, which I was disappointed with. I always wish there was more. Anyway, next on the list is our Fear. Fear 1 specifically. I don't recall if this was in 2 or not. In fact, I don't know that I ever played 2. But the original Fear is a bit of a classic FPS. Maybe not quite as classic as some of these, but fond memories, especially that there was like a railgun sort of thing that shot a peg, just a big old metal rod, and you could pin enemies to the wall. This is great stuff. But this shotgun, I remember being very meaty in its explosiveness, especially if you pair it up with the sort of bullet time effect that you could use in Fear. I don't recall it being a weapon that I used all the time, but I think it was one of the most used weapons. And probably it would be fair to call it at least a fallback option, if not a staple. So I think I'm going to go with staple for now. I don't know, I might change my mind on that as I think about it more. And this is one I'd love to hear your opinions on as well, because Fear, I think you've probably played more than I have on average. So yeah, let me know. Next, we're going to go with the GoldenEye 007 shotgun. Now, if I recall correctly, you could get a second one of these as well, or was that might have only been with a cheat code, which you might remember cheat codes. You just kind of enable them and disable them in a menu. But I seem to recall having 2 of them a lot of the time, and it may just be because of that. Fairly decent weapon. I recall it having a very explosive feel to it. It's not something you'll have a ton of ammo for, though, and I think you'll go through it and then you leave it alone quite a bit. And the GoldenEye arsenal is fairly massive, so you would cycle through weapons pretty regularly. So I'm going to go with fallback option, largely to do with the lack of ammo and perhaps, well, just it doesn't come up as often as some weapons do in that game. Usually using assault rifles and things like that, or combinations of pistols and assault rifles. But when it comes up, I mean, it's not a bad weapon for sure, and it's certainly not forgettable. It's just not, star of the show. Next, the Halo shotgun. I would say this is generally a great weapon, if not for the fact that you're often in large open environments, which can definitely reduce the effectiveness of a close-range spread pattern kind of weapon. My initial feeling is to put this under staple, But then when I think about it more, I mean, I'm almost always using an assault rifle, or, I mean, even in Halo 1, you would use the pistol quite a bit. And I believe melee, right? There was yeah, you could use the butt of the gun in that one too. So it was sort of like a fire melee kind of situation. So although I think this weapon is better than a lot of these shotguns, I'm still going to put in fallback just because you're often outside. And it's not always the best usage, but, you know, when it is, it's worth prioritizing to keep it with you if you know you're going to be in an interior situation. So the Perfect Dark shotgun is, for me anyway, very forgettable. In fact, I couldn't really recall what it felt like to even fire. I feel like it was very insubstantial, but, you know, your mileage may vary. I have very few memories of this at all, and that's why I think it's just the definition of forgettable. There's not much to it. There's so many more interesting, exotic, cool weapons in Perfect Dark that one just sort of just flies right by. The one thing it has going for it is at least it looks kind of nice. It's fairly sleek. But I don't really remember the structure of Perfect Dark well enough to even say whether it's one you would use a lot. So, you know, that one's kind of on me. I don't know if I should have included it, perhaps, because I don't have a lot of memories of it. But in this case, I don't think it was amazing. So, Serious Sam. This is another game with a fairly large arsenal. Very fast-paced, frenetic game with a lot of chaotic moments going on it. Kind of reminds me, in fact, a little bit of like the newer Dooms, where you're constantly flipping between weapons, trying to immediately adjust to what the situation is, because you'll have like 6 different types of enemies descending on you at the same moment, and you have to kind of pivot out of that however you can. The Serious Sam shotgun in this case, you need that blunt force immediacy of being able to stop what's right in front of you a lot of the time. There's usually stuff diving at you, so you need to just be able to pivot, shoot, move on, flip weapons, sometimes take some pot shots off at the distance. So I'd say this is a staple unless you have the better one, and in this case there's, I believe, a double-barreled shotgun as well. But there are several stand-ins for shotguns in sort of close-range, blunt force trauma kind of weapons in Serious Sam. So it's at least a fallback, if not a staple. I'm going to go fallback. It's probably better than that, but definitely useful at the very least. Now, I don't know if a lot of you played the original Shadow Warrior. This is one of, like, my jams from back in the day. I love Shadow Warrior. It's definitely a little bit problematic, more than a little bit, but at the very least, it had a really great arsenal, and I thought it actually stood as a very solid evolution from Duke 3D, being another one of those build engine games. Great arsenal of just bizarre, some of them are bizarre. There's like a beating heart you can crush in a head with your hands, and it is a whole thing. Also had a railgun, which I'm a big fan of, and maybe that'll be another category to do another day. The shotgun for it, though, was definitely one of the non-traditional ones in that it balanced between being a regular, like, single-fire shotgun, and then you can see it has multiple barrels sort of arranged like a chain gun, and that was its alt-fire, was that you could do a bam, 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 bam kind of thing. And I found that quite useful, and in fact, I would say this was at least a staple, if not even top tier. You know, I'm just going to go for it. Top tier for Shadow Warrior shotgun. Really good weapon, perhaps underappreciated over time, but just because there were so many other good weapons in Shadow Warrior. I mean, you would even switch back to the katana on occasion, and just do some melee action, which I can't say a lot of those old weapons, old game weapons, were really conducive to that kind of stuff. So yeah, good stuff on Shadow Warrior. If you haven't played it, I mean, the whole series has gotten pretty wild. I mean, Shadow Warrior 2, the most recent, and there's a third one in the works at the moment. If you haven't played Shadow Warrior 2, it's actually very good modern FPS, with a lot of variation and a similar kind of perspective to exotic weaponry. So if you're into that, check out the Shadow Warrior series. Still holds up fairly well. And last but not least, we've got our Turok 1 shotgun. If you look at it, it's not a very fancy device. You know, there's not much to it. It's a very standard single-barrel shotgun. The one thing it has going for it, though, that a lot of these don't, is it has an alt-fire, separate ammo mode, where if you get these incendiary rounds, or I think they're explosive, actually, you can use that instead, and it does a drastically larger amount of damage. Now, there is an auto shotgun that is the upgrade to this, and in a lot of the cases, and Turok is one of those ones that just lets you have access to the whole roster once you have them. A lot of the cases, you would opt to use the auto shotgun, but this one does feel pretty nice to use, and I think it might even be kind of nice to conserve on ammo by using a lesser quick way to cycle through that ammo. So I'm going to say the Turok 1 shotgun is a staple, actually. I'd say this is a pretty solid shotty. Just kind of looking back, reviewing my decisions here. The one that I guess I'm the most questioning is perhaps the Quake 1 shotgun. But I think it's just as a matter of you have it so often, like right in front of you, and when you start the game, it's always there. Sometimes maybe you do want to conserve on the double barrel ammo, but I don't know. It just feels so good to use the double barrel that, I don't know, is it not forgettable? Maybe I'm going to move it up. I'm going to go to fallback for that. Surprise, yeah, one more up a rank. So that would leave our top tier, and I did pick 2 of them. I actually wasn't sure that I was going to pick any when I started, is the Half-Life shotgun and the Shadow Warrior shotgun. So that's where we're going to leave it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree or disagree? I will put the link to this tier maker as well if you'd like to come up with your own combination, and send it to me on Twitter if you want, @RockleySmile. I will definitely be reading your comments for this, see what you think. If you have any games that I missed that you think definitely deserve consideration, let me know as well. There was some consideration I gave to Unreal Tournament. I thought the Flat Cannon was just a little bit too exotic to fit in with this group because they're kind of fairly standard shotguns. You could make an argument that maybe some of these don't belong here either, like the Marathon one or the Shadow Warrior one, but that's where I went with it anyway. The classic stuff that is fond to me, that sticks in my memory. But yeah, let me know what your opinions are, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching, everybody.